Okay, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Fitzpatrick. I'm with White Star Software, and we're talking about OpenEdge Diagnostic Data Collection. So let's look at how it works. In a nutshell, DDC is a configurable framework for capturing data about certain server-side, that is, database events. It happens to be 3 event types, but when Progress introduced the feature in 11.7, they described it as you know, these are the 3 we're going to look at right now, and we might add more later. They haven't, but that doesn't mean they couldn't. So if you can think of other events that they should be gathering data for, then I think that would be a great thing to submit to the ideas forum. So the 3 events are lock table overflow, system error, and BI threshold reached or approached. When your BI is growing, you'll get a notification in the log once it hits 90% of the size of the threshold, whatever you've set for BIT hold. So you get an event when you approach the threshold and also another one when it is reached. There are a number of different primary broker parameters that are used to configure this feature, and I'll go into some more detail about each of these in a later slide. And we don't have to configure this when the database starts. We can with those parameters, but we can also enable it online, which is really nice because if you want to start using this feature and playing with it, you don't have to shut down your database to do that. So to configure it online, you can either do that in a screen in Chrome, which we'll see an example of, or you can set the parameter values using the _db params VST, so doing that programmatically. So when this data is captured, it's written to flat files, and you can choose the format of those files, either CSV or JSON, using the diag format parameter, and that takes a parameter which is either CSV or JSON. So it's really your preference, just whatever you find easier to parse, because there isn't any analytical tool component to this. You're just going to get flat files, and then it's up to you to make sense of them and figure out what happened. So you can specify a level of detail. You can either get summary information, which is basically info from one VST, and which one it is depends on the event type, as we'll see, or detailed, which is that VST for summary plus other VSTs as well. And as I said, which ones you get depends on what the event type is. You also have the option on Unix of generating ProTrace files for self-service clients. Be careful about using this feature if you have lots of users, and we'll talk about that more in the case study. So here are the 3 event types and the tables that you get flat files from for summary level and for detailed level. So for log table overflow, if you have summary level, you just get data from the _user lock table, which has 1 record per user, at least the users who have record locks. And that's really kind of enough to be able to determine who the bad guy is, who's using all of the lock table. At detailed level, you also get the entire contents of _lock and _trans. So if you have a really large big L, you know, if it's, let's say, 500,000, you're going to get a CSV file with 500,000 lines in it, and for an overflow. So be aware of that, because these files can get big. For BI threshold reached, you just get the _logging VST output. At summary level and at detailed level, you get these other VSTs as well. And then for system error, there's really only 1 level, which is summary. You get, again, the _user lock VST data, and whether you select summary or detailed, that's all you get. So some more options for configuring this. You can decide to capture every event of a given event type or you can only capture those events that were fatal to the database that caused a shutdown, and that's configurable per event type. You can also decide that when any one of those 3 event types fires, that you capture data for all 3 events and not just for the one that actually happened. And then this one is, I think, just the killer feature in this feature, which is you can have the database run a custom script or program that you write to augment the data that's being captured. So if there are VSTs you'd really like to see data from, like _connect or something else, and it's not captured, you can, have your own 4GL query that runs from a script and capture that data. You could also have that script capture data from the OS, like the process list or the available disk space or whatever you can think of, and it could capture data from your application as well. Which order am I picking? Which batch job was running? Anything that you could think of. The location where the data gets written is specified by the diagdir parameter. If you have a federated application, so you've got multiple databases, you don't have to have a separate diagdir for each one. You could consolidate all of these logs into one location so that, for example, if you have a log table overflow and that message gets written to every connected database and you may not be sure which one it is, you don't have to go hunting to different places. If you put them all in one place, you're always going to find the data that you're looking for. And within that diagnostic directory, each event gets its own subdirectory, and here's the naming convention for that. So there's a prefix followed by a timestamp, the event type, and then an incrementing counter which goes up per event type since the database started. There's also within the diagnostic directory a master tracking file. The format of this will follow the diag format, either CSV or JSON. And there will be start and end event data written into that file when the event happens. So that also includes the path to that directory and the type of it. Here's an example of what that looks like. This is the CSV just pulled into Excel. So we've got a timestamp, the PID and thread ID, the logging level that was specified, what type of process was it, the event type, the database path, and the full path of the event directory, and then start and end. So there's a line item for each of those. You'll notice here that in addition to log table, system error, and VI threshold, there's also this fourth event type that I haven't discussed yet, which says DB status. And that's an ad hoc collection of data. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. So you don't have to wait for an event to happen to gather this data. You can just tell the database, I want to collect this data now. And then you'll get data for all 3 event types. So in the CSV format, you can specify a field separator if you want to. The default is space. That works well. I haven't changed it, but if you want column or pipe, whatever, you can change that. Diag pause allows you to pause activity in the database during the collection for n number of seconds. So if you specified this, then the theory is you would get a more consistent data capture because nothing is changing during the collection. However, for an OLTP application, that's potentially dangerous. So I've never used this feature, and I would just advise be cautious if you're going to use it. Test it in a test environment and see what it does. So more about the extensibility feature, that custom script that you can create. There's a particular file name that the database will look for if you specify that you want to run a custom script. In Unix, it's called diagproc. It's case sensitive, and so that's going to be an executable file. It must that file must reside in the database directory. On Windows, it'll either run diagproc.exe if it exists, or if it doesn't, it'll look for diagproc.bat and run that if it exists. It can take input parameters, so when the script gets run, it will be passed in the path of the event directory and the event type and the database name. So that's really nice because you could have your script run, tailored blocks of logic depending on, what application it is, based on the database name. You could vary it by event type, so have run one block of logic for log table overflows, but a different flow of control for BI threshold exceeded and so forth. So it's very customizable, which is nice. So more about that ad hoc capture. As I said, you don't have to wait for one of these events to happen. If you see that your BI is growing, or you see that your lock table high watermark is increasing, you don't have to wait until the dire event happens. You could decide you want to capture the data immediately. There are two ways of doing that. One is in a Promon screen, which we'll look at in a second, and the other is programmatic. So this is the code that you would run if you wanted to capture the data. So there's a field in the DB status VST, a logical field. So if you set it to yes, this DB status initiate diag, then that will capture data, and as we saw in the tracking file, the event type that's listed there will be DB status. So as I said, it captures data for all three of the event types, and the DB status event type will be in the directory. The other way to do this is in Promon. So this screen is R&D 414, and you can see that there are, for all of the startup parameters I talked about, there are options where you can set these within Promon, which is nice. And you can change them on the fly and modify them, and you don't have to restart or anything. Just be careful about using these, because if you go into one of these, like let's say number one, diag directory, you'll get a prompt, and whatever you type next will be the new directory. If you just hit enter, it'll be blank. You're putting in a null string, so you'll actually be deleting the directory. In that instance, if you do that, or if you, let's say, delete the directory from the file system while the database is running, then the database directory itself will become the new diag directory. So at the bottom of this screen, option 9, it says collect enabled diagnostic data now. You would just enter 9, and that's what triggers the capture. Also, I mentioned that there were the 3 event types, and that you can specify a logging level for each one of them. These are the numbers here. Logging levels can range from 0 to 15, or -1 to -15. And this is a handy explanation of what those numbers mean. So you can change the number, and it'll change the explanation to match, to tell you what actually would be captured if that event fired at that login level. So here are all the event levels, and again, you specify these per event type, so you don't have to use the same level for all 3 event types. This number corresponds to a certain level of VST data collection, and again, remember that it's different VSTs for different event types. And then you can decide whether to generate ProTrace files or not. Again, those are self-service only, and only in Unix. And you can specify whether or not you want to run your custom script, which is called diagproc or .bat or .exe. You can also decide when any one of the events fires that you want to collect the data for all 3. So half of them have that turned on and half turned off. And finally, if you specify one of these levels with a negative, that means that we're only going to capture if that event brought down the database. So some suggestions on these parameters and setting their values. I would say for diagdir, put it on a fast disk because you could be writing a lot of data in a short period of time. Preferably put it in a non-database partition, because if you write a ton of data, you don't want to fill up your database partition and crash the database and make a bad problem worse. For the diag event, which is that takes a comma delimited string of event type colon event level. Particularly with the lock table overflow, be careful about using the detail level, because, as I said, that will include all of underscore lock. So if you have a really big lock table, you get a really big CSV file. In the case study that we're going to look at, my client had a big L of 1,000,000. So that's a CSV file with 1,000,000 line items. So it's about 160 megs per file. All the rest of the VSTs, the flat files that you can get are tiny in comparison. They're, bytes or kilobytes, but this one in particular, just be careful about that. Don't capture at that level unless you need to see, what are the tables and the rec IDs involved. Usually just the summary is good enough in that case, because it'll give you a record per user and their lock count, which is, as I said, typically enough to figure out who the culprits are. There's another parameter I haven't really discussed yet, which is diag event level, and in my opinion, that's not too useful. It's just a way of specifying one logging level for all 3 events. So if you say I want 7, then it'll be level 7 for lock table and BI threshold and system error. Although if you also specify the event level in diag event, that will override the event level. So I just use this one, and I don't use this one. The field separator, as I said, you can change it, but if you're going to import the data into, let's say, a table or a temp table in ADL, or you're going to bring it into Excel for parsing, space works fine for that. The diag format, it's really just a personal preference, whatever type of data you're more comfortable parsing. I'm a simple person, so I use CSV. But if you like JSON, then you can use that. Just a note on that format, though, in the case of CSV, you'll get one line item per entry in the file, whatever VST it's being captured from. In JSON, because it's sort of inherently hierarchical, you'll just get one file that contains all of the data. The diag pause, as I said, please be careful about using that. I wouldn't use that right away if I were you, and I wouldn't use it if I had tested my application with it. The prefix on the event directories is by default diag event underscore, but you can change that if you like. So you might want to, put in the database name if it's a multi-database environment, so that you could see at a glance in the directory listing which database had the event, or you could have an application name or whatever distinction is meaningful to you. You can change that. I said that the name of the script, the custom script that you can create, has a hard-coded name. In 12.2, a parameter was added called diagproc, which lets you specify your own name. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually work, so don't try to use it. I have reported a bug on that, so hopefully that'll be fixed in a future release. So I borrowed this diagram from Progress. In a nutshell, the sort of workflow that the database goes through when this feature is enabled. So when an event happens, let's say it's a lock table overflow, it looks to see, have you enabled data collection? If so, it adds a line item to the tracking file saying this event started, and here's the directory where it is. If protraces are to be generated, then it sends a SIG user 1 to each of the client processes. If we're running a custom script, then it forks that or executes it on Windows. If we've specified diag pause, then it's going to go into this loop to wait until either until the event ends, or you can also create a file called diag completed and put it into the event directory, and that will terminate the pause even if it hasn't expired. And then finally, it writes the end line item into the tracking file, and then